You're going to spank them? What? Okay, is spanking really necessary? Is that biblical? Should we be spanking? What do we do? Let's talk about this. Stay tuned.
You don't want to miss it. You're listening to Marriage Mania, where we are audacious, sagacious, and tenacious for the Lord to uphold godly marriages and to raise fervent children who are countercultural and stand for biblical truth.
Hi, welcome back. I'm Tania.
And I'm Michael.
And do we spank? Is this important? Is this biblical? Is this something that we should be doing to our children? Is spanking something that hurts me more than it hurts them? How do we spank? And what do we do about this? When God tells us that we are to be people who discipline our children and discipline in them in the Lord. And also there's consequences that happen when our children don't obey. So today we're going to talk about that. But before we get started, please subscribe here. It helps us to get the message out. It helps us to be able to reach out to as many families as possible. And we also have Bible studies at marriagemaniaministry.com. We have Bible studies for husbands and wives, the covering the role of a biblical husband and the helper, the role of a biblical wife. You should check those out. It really helps marriages to grow in their biblical role, to understand how to work together as a couple, as a team, and just really follow the Lord. So we're so thankful for those Bible studies. So Michael, today, let's talk about spanking. Why is this something that's not done as often? And why should we do it? And is it harmful for our children to spank? And why would we refrain from not spanking? So let's talk about this, because this is something that we've agreed on when we've talked about spanking. So let's talk about what we do and why it's important and why it's biblical.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's all over the Bible about he who spares the rod hates his child, but he who disciplines his child loves him. And God says he disciplines those he loves. And so sometimes God has his version of the rod as well when he disciplines us when we get off his path in order to get us back on his path. And, spanking is one of the probably least enjoyable aspects of parenting. And it's one of those things that has probably gotten out of style lately. But I think as a consequence, it's part of the reason why we have a lot of children that are off the rails and out of control to a large degree, and hard for other adults to control, like a classroom or Sunday school class or things like that, because we don't have some of these other techniques that should be rarely done, but it backs up what other tools that you're using as a parent, that the child knows, the young child knows that you'll go to this method if they don't adhere to other lesser forms of discipline, like your words. If you ignore my words, maybe we go to a timeout. Are you going to ignore my timeout and that's not working? Or the situation warrants something to a greater degree than a timeout doesn't fit the crime, as it were. You let them know, okay, this was a little bit more egregious. You crossed a big line here, and it deserves a spanking. And it is for the younger ages. It's not for the older kids.
Right. Yeah. You're not going to spank a teenager. That's crazy. And that's over the top. Right. But, I do want to say before you mention more about that is we also have to make sure that our heart posture as parents, when we're spanking, that it's not, done in a way of it's emotional. Like, we're not emotionally doing it.
We're not anger.
Right. We're not doing it out of anger. We're doing it because we love our child. So that's one thing I want to make sure that we really specify here, because we're not just spanking people because we want to spank them, right?
To just unload our anger on a child, right? No, that's not what we're doing. This is a very calculated, and oftentimes after maybe even a timeout. So if you need to calm down as a parent, sometimes we have to have a timeout.
Or you tag team it.
You tag team it, right? Yeah. If some dynamic happened between you and the child, then maybe I as the father step in and go, whoa, you said what? To my wife, that's going to deserve a spanking.
Right. And also, I also think that this is a charge too for Christians, and for everyone, but for Christians, biblically, this is something that God calls us to do. Like you mentioned the rod, and we do this because we love our children, because we want to raise godly children who are obedient. That's the result here, because I just think about what Samuel told to Saul in First Samuel. He basically said, Saul was like, "Yeah, I've done everything God told me to do, and I sacrificed." And Samuel said, "It is better to obey than to sacrifice."
Mm.
Meaning you did not obey what God asked you to do. You did what you wanted to do. And so now you're going to have discipline. God stripped the kingdom away, which is a form of discipline. He disciplined him. I mean, I don't know if God can really spank him. I mean, God could do anything, but that was a form of spanking, of disciplining, um, by stripping away the kingdom from Saul. And I think that's kind of another picture for us of, we're not spanking because we're like, "Oh, I'm just so tired of you." No, we're spanking because you did something wrong outside of the boundaries that I gave you. And now you have consequences for that. And so I have to do this. I don't want to, but I have to. And I want to do it with emotions of love, not emotions of anger.
Yes, got to be in control when you spank, and maybe there's some parents that need to have that boundary on themselves because they can't maintain that control, and therefore shouldn't spank just because they always take it too far.
Mm-hmm.
So there might be that situation, but we as parents need to stay in control all the time, and that's not
Mm-hmm.
easy, and that's why timeouts can often help. We feel ourselves getting out of control, timeout. Because we can have parenting can be very frustrating, as we all know. And so, but we've got to maintain our cool. And even in the face of disrespect from our child, we've got to be the bigger person and recognize, okay, they may be going through some hormonal changes right now, that's causing some behavior disruptions, or whatever issue they might be going through. And let me have some understanding of that. I'm always going to try to maintain my control as much as possible. And it's definitely needed in the area of spanking, and it's only in very limited situations. It's only if in very egregious situations they crossed a very definite line, different than the everyday stuff. And for repeated behavior, sometimes we can use spanking. We got to end this repeating behavior, and nothing else working, and they're just continuing to do this. So now every time you do this behavior, you're going to get a spanking in
Mm-hmm.
order to stop this
Mm-hmm.
repeated behavior that's disrupting the household. And it's only for young children before the
Yeah.
age of reason, before between the ages of 1.5 to 6, according to Dr. James Dobson, very respected
Yeah.
child psychologist in the Christian community. um, After 6, you want to start phasing it out. You never ever for any reason spank a 12-year-old on up.
No,
That's it starts to
that's weird.
no, and it's diminishing returns
Yeah.
that humiliates a child, because it's like you're doing something to a older child that's only reserved for younger ones, and they know it, and it's a humiliating experience. Whereas as for younger children, it helps them draw the connection of, before they can really reason out anything and make the connections to other disciplinary methods. It's like, oh, I did something wrong and I got a sting on my bottom, and maybe I won't do that again. And so it helps draw that connection. It helps draw the connection of, oh, you're the authority figure here. You actually get to tell me what to do, and you're supposed to direct my behavior. So it helps a young child make those connections as well.
Yeah, and I know for us, like we stopped really doing the spankings, like probably closer to 7 years old or something like that, because we were really phasing it out. I know we wanted to just get away from it. Not that it's a bad thing, but now we're getting into more maturity, and we want different types of consequences that also that allow the child to take further action. So we definitely moved away from that. But we,
And I think it naturally fades itself out. I think
yeah,
if you do it right,
yeah,
that it just you just less, you need it less and less.
yeah, we didn't really think about it
Right. We didn't
anymore.
like, it wasn't like a purposeful thing. We need to start phasing it out. I mean, we knew the age, okay, 6, we need to start, but it's not like we had to make a concerted effort to phase it out. It was because of the use of it. If you do it correctly, you don't actually have to spank very often because the
Mm-hmm.
child knows it's there.
Mm-hmm.
And the other lesser means actually have strength to it. Because
Mm-hmm.
if you don't do this, you're going to get a spanking, and they know it. And you don't even have to necessarily even say that because they know it because it's there.
Yeah, I think
And
we mentioned that like we would have breakfast and we would say, okay, if you don't act a certain way, we would use a wooden spoon. But we would say, okay, we've got it right here and it's going to be right beside me all day long. So when your behavior goes a different way, it's going to be used. So it was just there.
right, and I think what you're referring to is the blitz. At least that's
Yeah.
what I like to call it.
We
That's
call
what
it
I.
the blitz.
It's a technique that I read about, but they didn't attach a name to it. But I attached the name to it called a blitz because that's what it reminded me of. It's where you have repeated behavior and you're trying all the other tools in your toolbox, your disciplinary tools, and they're not working. And it's like this behavior just keeps repeating. They keep ignoring what I'm asking them to do. They keep talking back to me. They keep whining. And they just have this incessant whining. Some kind of repeated behavior that on by itself as an individual behavior might not warrant a spanking, but it's repeated and nothing else is working to stop it, and it needs to stop. And so a blitz is like an all-out effort. It reminded me of police work. I guess I was a police officer for 20 years, and one of the things in like if a neighborhood got out of control with crime, and you could see that the statistics were going off the rails, and there was a lot of robberies and really bad things happening. Well, technique was to flood that area with law enforcement. And so you would do it and you would ticket anything that moved. And so it really worked. The statistics have shown, all the studies is that you have crime rates are out of control. You blitz the area, the crime rate drop right back down. And so it was very effective. And so that's what it reminded me of, is that
Yeah.
blitz. It's like, okay, for whatever reason in this neighborhood, people have stopped abiding by law and they're ignoring the police. What's going on? Well, let's show that there's
blitz.
law enforcement here. Let's blitz the area, and it worked. It's the same way with parenting. It's like, okay, I don't know what's going on with this particular behavior, but it's continuing and nothing is working. We're going to blitz it, and it's a way of just telling the child, look, this has kind of gone on for long enough. We're tired of being ignored here, and we love you very much, but this is what's going to happen. That every time this behavior happens, we're not going to sit there and think about it anymore and have this long lecture or try to figure out how to make it stop. We're just going to immediately give you a spanking
and take action.
And this is your warning right now. And it was kind of funny because it was the first time we did that. I only had to spank once to let it be known, oh, I guess he actually meant that. and then after that, it cleared up the behavior. And then every other time that we needed to call a blitz, I didn't even have to spank, just letting it be known that was going to happen.
Yeah, your words.
The words. See, that's where if you have the spanking, you rarely actually have to spank, because we never actually had to use the blitz, but one time where I said that we were going to do a blitz. I warned the child, and it was ignored the first time because I guess we were going to see if it was really for true.
Yeah.
And
to
test. And when she said, "Oh my goodness, you actually mean business," never had to spank again with the blitz. Had to call a blitz several times, but just calling the blitz stopped the behavior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, those are effective things because, we're using our words. I know for you didn't have to do the blitz, but I know for me, I had to make sure I carried my wooden spoon on my side like a belt, like a tool, because as a mom who's right beside my daughter and we're doing homeschool and all these things and the behavior, there's frustration happening, no obedience. And so I've had to use, the wooden spoon, and, it's not anything that would harm her. It's right on the bottom and it stings. And she's always had a heart to turn. So she's always turned away from that sin, and she's repeated it over and over. But we've had that conversation so that would help her stay on track and make sure that she's not doing it again. So I talked a little bit about the different techniques around what we use of the wooden spoon, but there's other methods that parents can use. And we kind of strayed away from a couple of them, but let's talk about those different tools.
Well, as far as like spanking, I know some prefer to use the hand so they can feel how hard they're hitting, and that's probably less likely to leave any kind of mark, which is not your goal. You're just trying to give a sting
Right.
to give a point, and to wake someone up. But it's I would for me, I would avoid any kind of implement like a switch or a rod or anything like that. I think
Right.
there's more chances in law enforcement. I saw that oftentimes where we would go to calls where a child would be spanked and there would be marks left, and then we have to make the determination, was this within the bounds of spanking or did this go
Right.
further into child abuse,
Hmm.
and so those are harder to determine. But it's like, as far as I mean, usually you're not going to get the attention of law enforcement in any of this, anyways. If you are, you really probably need to examine whether you're crossing a line. But you don't. The goal is not to leave a mark. So your belts and your rods and switches and things like that are more likely to leave a mark. Especially if you get a little bit over exuberant with what you're doing.
Yeah,
And
it's
so I wouldn't, for me, I didn't like
mm,
that idea. I didn't like the hand, because again, going back to like
touch
to
and
touch is like, I
hmm
want my touch to be a loving touch. So any kind of hugs and embraces in my hand is all going to be for love, and I don't use it for discipline as well. So we like the idea of a spoon that we just kind of flip the almost our wrist just enough to give a sting, with the head of the wooden spoon, but wouldn't do anything else. And it was not our hand. So that's what we preferred.
yeah.
So
Yeah, I
that's
mean, I totally agree because I remember a friend mentioning a wooden spoon. And I know growing up, I think I had like a switch or something. A lot of things were different when I was growing up. But I just think that the hand would be so unloving. The hand is never to be used in a way that would harm your child or your children. The wooden spoon is just like that medium of like, okay, this is the discipline rod that we're using to be able to discipline you and spank you because of your disobedience to us, and you've crossed a boundary. And so that's why we wanted to use the spoon. And that was just enough. If she saw the spoon, she would always say, no, 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 no.
mm,
And it's not like we would even use it. It was just the presence of the spoon would be like, okay, I'm going to straighten up because I don't want anything to happen to me today. So I want to be the best listener ever. And I mean, just the look of me pulling, I would always pull it out of the drawer gently and was like, uh-huh. And I pull out the spoon. No.
mm,
So that's basically what we do. No hands, no other objects or anything like that. That would just be completely outside of what we believe. We just thought, God wants us to do it in love. And so our rod is the actual wooden spoon, and that's what we used as a disciplinary technique.
right. And again, what's great, and you might have a more defiant child where you're going to have to use spanking more often. There'll be some children you don't have to spank at all,
Right.
because other methods, they're just more compliant. Maybe they're more sensitive, so all your words are enough to.
Mhm.
Sometimes you got to even be gentle with your words, or you can just like hurt their feelings with
Right.
just your words. So you
Right.
got to gauge your child and how sensitive they are, and if other disciplinary methods are working, you don't have to even use spanking for them. But I think for a lot of your children, they're going to be pretty defiant, and spanking's going to be needed. But spanking should definitely only be used for your more egregious offenses like defiance, or hitting or lying, or things that. Remember, our daughter one time just kind of turned and bucked up on you and pointed her finger at you and said, "Oh no, you didn't! Don't you ever do that again!" And I was like, "Oh no, you didn't."
Mm. That required a
that
spanking.
required a spanking.
Yeah.
You kind of bypass all the other tools on the continuum, and you go straight to make a point that, oh no, you don't talk to a parent with those kind
Right.
of words, and that's going to
Exactly.
get a spanking, and then some time in your room for you to calm down, so then we can come back and then talk about what happened. Those very important discussions with a lot of questions to get them to examine their behaviors ending with apologies and yes, I forgive you, and hugs and kisses, and reset the whole situation.
Yeah. So, I mean, this whole podcast really was around spanking and why it needs to be done, and to be able to have those disciplinary techniques in our children. And we just want to abide by what God's word tells us to do. And if we don't spank, and these are the different disciplinary techniques that we've been talking about, if you've been following along in our series, but this is just another step that might have to be used, maybe not, but it really does help the child understand that we mean business. And when we are asking you for obedience, it's better to be obedient than to sacrifice, right? Like I mentioned earlier with Samuel and Saul. And so when our child obeys, brings joy. It also gives us more ability to give them more responsibility. And so I think that's key here as they're growing up, and we're raising up strong biblical children who are going to be obedient, and we want that. And we do it all in love, and that's the whole point here. Everything that we do it in love. We do it because God has asked us to do it, but we're doing it in love. So this was a great conversation as to why we should spank, what spanking is all about. Should we be spanking, and is it biblical? And so hopefully you found this podcast helpful. If you did, please give us a thumbs up. It helps us to get the message out there. We want to be able to reach as many families as possible for Jesus Christ. And also, please check out our Bible studies at marriagemaniaministry.com. We have the covering, the role of a biblical husband, and the helper, the role of a biblical wife. Those Bible studies are available. They have really helped change lives. We've seen a lot of testimonies from people just understanding their biblical role. So check those out at marriagemaniaministry.com. So thank you for following along in the series as we are talking about the disciplinary techniques, and we just talked about spanking. And so hopefully that gives you a biblical perspective as to why we do it and why we think it's important, and we just want to follow the Bible. So continue to follow along. Until next time.
God bless.